Well, it wasn't unexpected because Iran was left with just very few options, all of them bad options. They couldn't not respond. The calculation in Tehran is if they don't respond, they're going to be seen more as sort of this so called paper tiger. It's going to be perceived as weakness, and they're just going to get hit harder, which I think is the case very much, at least with the Israeli attacks. If they responded, they had to calibrate the response, both in messaging and the actual action, to not be seen as a major escalation, so to not drag the US further into the war, but to be seen as sort of an in-kind retaliation that they could then message to their own base in their framing and their own supporters that they did respond. And we very much see that echo both in the statements that they have posted afterwards and also in the nature of the attack. They have emphasized on the fact that they launched the same number of sort of missiles or attacks as it was launched on them. They launched it towards a large base, ironically, in a country that's also a friend to both sides. But it sounds like they've also calibrated it, meaning with advance notice to the host, which is Qatar, their close friend, and also to the Americas, to minimize and not really cross that red line for the American side, which would be loss of American life. So if this attack had fatalities on the U.S. side, service members, personnel, and most worse than that, civilians, then it would be seen as a major escalation and the U.S. would have to respond. Now we're seeing that from the response of the U.S. president also. It sounds like they did achieve what they wanted, and now it's time to sort of take that off ramp and exit this episode towards de-escalation.
So, Negar, you're telling us that in your view, the IRGC sought a response that they could sell to their base as a success and as a strong retaliation without incurring too much of a response from the U.S. Do you think, you said they will frame this to their base in a successful way. Do you think that the IRGC's base looks at this? 19 missiles launched, 18 of them intercepted, no damage done to the U.S. air base. The U.S. president saying, thank you, Iran, for warning us before. Your answer was weak. Do you think the IRGC will look at this and say, mission accomplished?
Well, that's what they're trying. It also depends on who looks at it. Just like President Trump, however he messages to his base, that's what they're going to take over any other sort of media and messaging. And that's what the IRGC is trying to do. And I just want to also reiterate, the base is not just inside Iran. This is across the region with the so-called axis of resistance, where everyone is watching how Iran is reacting to sort of the situation that they're perceived as weak and as not responsive. But I think this was the calibration. The red line for the U.S. clearly was the loss of American life. This also provided sort of a face-saving exit for President Trump to say there was no damage, no lives lost, and now they can move towards peace.
Okay, let's assume then for a moment that the U.S. and Iran both feel that they've accomplished what they wanted over the last 2-3 days, and they both walk away from direct confrontation. What then?
Well, the only similar situation we can compare this to is in 2020, January 2020, under the first Trump administration, when the president ordered the assassination of the top Iranian general Soleimani, and then Iranians responded by attacking the U.S. base in Iraq. Sort of a similar situation, and then an off-ramp, and it stopped there. Both countries were on the brink of war back then. It could have escalated, but it didn't. They took an off-ramp and de-escalated. I'm seeing a similar situation here. But what complicates the calculation is Israel. There's a third party involved here who actually started attacks on Iran before the U.S. even got involved, and in a way sabotaged the nuclear diplomacy that was going on between Iran and the U.S. So moving back to the negotiating table is not going to be as simple, because it's not just the two parties who want negotiations and who don't want direct confrontation. There's a third party who actually wants the conflict to go on. I think the Israelis, especially Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, has been wanting this U.S.-Iran war for the past 20-something years. He's been on the record pushing for it since the U.S. invasion of Iraq. And I think he is going to push for that and sort of try to sabotage or prevent any form of diplomacy and negotiations, or the so-called peace, as President Trump is framing it, to happen between the two sides. So it's going to be complicated, but at the same time, the U.S. also has a lot of leverage and power, especially hard power and force over the Iranian side, but soft power over the Israeli side. Israel relies on the U.S. for military, financial support. They're relying on the U.S. for continuing their war against Iran in the defense, the intercept of missiles and all of that. So the U.S. has leverage. Whether President Trump would want to use that and use it in a strategic way remains to be seen. He couldn't stop Israel from attacking Iran, and he sort of went along with it and even joined it in one step. But now I guess the ball is in U.S. court, and U.S. does have a lot of room to maneuver. We just have to see how he's going to use that.